There was a guy that I taught named Leslie, and he was a big dude, stocky, had big old beard, young guy, maybe 35 years old, and he hated religion. He hated religion. And his mom was a convert, however, she was inactive. But when she was taking the lessons from the missionaries, every time they'd come over, he'd walk into the back and he'd sit down in the backyard and have a smoke. Or he'd sit down in the backyard and have a beer. Never would talk to the missionaries. He hated the idea of religion. Hated God, hated everything. And one day at church, he took his aunt with him to church because she was a member, and she was visiting, but he wasn't going to pay attention to anything. He was just there because she had health issues. He wanted to be there to support her, and he wasn't going to listen. So he gets into gospel principles, and obviously he has an issue with everything that we're teaching, and so he'll raise his opinion here and there, and we're on the principle of repentance, and he pipes up, "I've never done anything I've ever regretted. I've never done anything I felt bad for." And to this day, I don't remember exactly what I felt impressed to say, but the Spirit just put some words into my mouth of a question and a couple of thoughts for him, a little rebuttal to his arguments. And he heard what I'd said, and he listened, and he was quiet for a long time, which was surprising because he wasn't a guy that was quiet very much. He talked a lot, and he was very loud in the fact that I'm right and you're wrong. And after he heard that, he said, "Well, you know, that's a really good point. I've never thought of it like that." And after church, ended up approaching him, and he indicated that he'd felt something a little different. And we asked if we could go by and teach him, and he said yes. For the first time that he's ever agreed to meet with missionaries, and we went out to his house, and for whatever reason, he seemed almost excited to meet us. He seemed almost excited for us to be there. And we talked to him, taught him the first lesson. And he told us how one of the most important things to him in his life was his daughters. And seeing that he had been divorced, he didn't have the privilege of seeing his daughters very much. They lived off with their mother. And he said if there was one thing that he wanted in his life, it would be to be with his daughters. And so my companion and I prayed. And I remember having the prompting, by the time we went back for the second lesson, to promise him and say to him, "Leslie, if you take these discussions and you find out that they're true, would you be baptized?" And he said, "Well, if I knew it was true, yeah, but I don't know." And we promised him and said, then if you put in your effort and you try to learn from us in sincerity, and you progress towards baptism, then you will have your daughters back in your life. He later on ended up telling me that when he heard that promised, he was convinced that one of two things was going to happen. Either first, he was going to be baptized and he was going to have his daughters, or second, we were lying, he wasn't going to have his daughters and he was going to kill us. Not joking. And I wouldn't put it past him. He said, I would have killed him, and if not that, I would have at least seriously injured them and put him in the hospital. Oh, man. It's a good thing that you live on faith as a missionary, because it would kind of scare you otherwise. But by the end of that very weekend, his daughters were with him in his house, and he hadn't had them in his home or seen them in over 6 months. He took that as a sign. Things started falling into place, one thing right after another, to where he had his daughters every other weekend, and he got to see them a lot. And he started to gain their trust a lot. And it was amazing to see the differences that happened in his life. He got his answer that the church was true. It took him a lot of effort. It wasn't easy for him, but he put a lot of work in. He went from drinking, well over 5 cups of coffee a day to just cutting it clean off because he knew it was right. He went from smoking and drinking and doing drugs and growing drugs and doing everything along those lines and getting into bar fights to just completely cleaning up his act and loving church and loving the gospel. And he got baptized, and it was amazing to see the difference that happened in his life.